Okay, so we're at the top of the hour here, so there's still a few people trickling in here, I see, but let's make a start. So thanks for joining us on our webinar today, looking at data governance strategies. I'm Mike Smitherman over here at Metric Insights. I have Marius with me today again. Hi, Marius.
Hello, Mike.
So yeah, happy to be presenting on this topic today. Usual sort of housekeeping pieces. So we are recording this. So Zoe will send this out afterwards to those who are interested with sharing it or listening to it again. Um, we'll try and leave some time for Q&A at the end. So the usual Q&A and chat windows that you see in the Zoom. Feel free to enter any questions that you might have in there, and we'll keep an eye on that. But I guess with that, let's get kicked off, Marius, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all of you for joining us for the webinar today to talk about the hidden pitfalls in the data governance strategy. To kind of kick it off, if you do any kind of research on the web associated with data governance success rates, you will surely see that multiple sources out there cite this Gartner study that they did, where they found that something like 90% of data governance initiatives fail. And this is a startling statistic, of course, and it is at its face almost seems unbelievable, except that if you happen to talk to people that have done data governance initiatives, and I do this all the time at conferences and talk to various folks, and if you or you do among your own community, just talk to people that have done this, you'll find that actually it's very common, that failure is much more common than success, and that if you talk to 100 people, you'll be lucky if you find more than a handful of people that have implemented a data governance initiative that is widely successful within the enterprise after let's say 6 to 9 months post deployment. What I mean by widely successful, meaning that it's really widely adopted. It's integrated into everything that people are using, and it's accomplished all of the objectives that were set out at the beginning. And that's a clearly not where we want to be. And I think it is, so it's important to understand, why is it that this particular initiative, data governance initiatives, have such a high failure rate, or if they are successful, they're so successful in such a limited way that on a more broad perspective, the enterprise doesn't see them as a success. Why is that? And what is it that we can do to do something differently, right? So this webinar is going to be about going through the source of the reasons for why these failures happen, but more importantly, understanding what are the things that can be done differently. We want to leave you with a framework for actually achieving success, and also give you some very concrete examples of what success could look like, right? So that you have some ideas that you can take and apply in your environment, irrespective of what data governance tool you use, what BI portal capabilities you use, that you can apply those to your situation and have a different outcome than is so common in the industry. So let's get started. So it's useful to first begin, at the beginning, by thinking about what does the typical data governance journey look like. Right? And almost in all cases, when an organization undertakes a data governance initiative, they start with where the pain points are. What is it that they really want to accomplish that cannot be accomplished today, where they hope to have data governance help. And some of the most common objectives around the data governance journey that people have are as follows. Obviously, understanding data lineage is usually a big concern within organizations. Oftentimes, there's a great pain out there where new analysts are trying to build reports, and they don't necessarily know where's the data they need to trust. Which tables are the thousands or tens of thousands of tables in the enterprise are the right ones to use. Maybe a report consumers don't know whether their report is coming from a data warehouse, is it coming from some other source, is it certified, things of that nature. Like, where is everything coming from? Having that context is oftentimes missing, and data governance is often cited as a way to achieve that goal. Then there's obviously, and maybe this is not even the first objective that people have, is ensuring compliance around PII data. So all organizations need to look at how and where PII data is entering the system and how it's being consumed. And there's a general goal of making sure that people are aware of the reporting that contains PI data, tables that contain PI data, and that data is used appropriately so that it does not get misused or does not get leaked outside of the organization. So governance is clearly important for that. And then the third primary objective that's there for almost all data governance initiatives is to establish some baseline level of data literacy. So this means, make sure that people that when they use a given report, they know, how are the numbers defined, where not only where do they come from, but how are they calculated? What are the other reports that have the same kind of information? To avoid that very common scenario, the classic almost stereotype that cited where two people show up at the meeting, both of them with different reports on the same topic with different numbers, and they just don't know which numbers to trust or why these numbers don't match up, right? So having that data literacy to say, I, as a consumer of information, I know what the report contains, and I know where that data comes from, and I'm really competent at working with that data. So with that in mind, as people undertake this journey, usually they will begin by acquiring a data catalog tool, right? So that may be Alation, it might be Calibra, it might be Informatica, Purview. There are many. Sometimes people build their own, but there's usually the idea of like, hey, let's use a tool to be able to do this, and they'll do some kind of a POC, evaluate the features against some of these capabilities that we just discussed, and then select the technology. And then once that technology is selected, then they will enable it to basically crawl all of the data within your enterprise to be able to figure out, where does the PII data reside? So, I've got to be able to inventory the tables, inventory the PII data. Usually there's some automation involved, or either manually or robotic automation. You set attributes on data sources to be able to specify, whether it's key pieces of metadata around certification or ownership or other kinds of attributes that are relevant. You'll do that for the most important data sources so that you have an enriched environment. It's not just about the tables, but there's more information than would be in the database. Then you might go and create some sample glossary definitions. You might take some of the things that are most important to define within your enterprise. How do you define sales? What is gross margin calculated? What does churn look like? Whatever other things that are relevant to your business or your particular enterprise, you come up with definitions and apply those and put them in the catalog, because you hope that will clear up confusion and people can use those definitions in building reports and analyses off of that include these key concepts. And then, once you've got this sort of initial piece done with the crawling and the tagging and the maybe certification and a little bit of glossary, you kind of declare victory on phase one and you launch it, and you make you maybe throw a launch party, right? And what happens is, well, typically, unfortunately, no one shows up. I mean, and when I say no one shows up, I don't mean absolutely no one. I mean, initially, people will come and take a look at your BI at your new solution if you promote it internally. So you get a little bit of curiosity seekers and people looking at it. But if you sort of play things forward 6 months, 9 months, a year, and you go back and look at your usage, invariably there's very low usage. You maybe have the people in the data governance team, maybe one or two, a handful of other enthusiastic analysts are in there from time to time. But as far as broadly within the organization, you just find that you're not getting, broad usage. And this kind of cycle repeats itself. And usually at the end of this, people say, oh, well, let's pick another data governance tool, or let's try to reset this, just try a different approach with what data we're collecting. There's a whole bunch of things that happen to try it again. But I think it's important to understand why. Why are these initial failures so common? What's causing them, right? And there are a few key misconceptions that lead to this high failure rate. First of all, I think we need to recognize that addressing a pain point, such as like, hey, I'm going to create a place where data literacy can be addressed or PI data is categorized, is not the same as creating value, right? Because it's not just solving a particular problem, but it's solving a problem in a way that can be consumed within your organization that actually generates value, right? Value is, it's all well and good that glossary items exist, but unless people are referring to those definitions all the time and they become the lingua franca of how people engage with your analytics, then they're not really creating value. Right? You've addressed the pain point, but it's been done in this way that is simply not efficient and does not actually materialize in value. Right? The second thing that is important to realize, and this is maybe a little counterintuitive, is that, when people think about the fact that, hey, there's all these pain points around data governance, people don't know where to access content, they don't understand what these terms mean. You almost assume that users will want to use a data governance tool. Well, surely if we give them a tool where we answer these questions, they'll come and use it. And this couldn't be further from the truth, right? There's just, plain spoken for you, right? People do not want to use kind of a complex user interface that just contains data governance information into it, that is not integrated in their general workflow. Everyone has a workflow, whether it's an analyst or analyst consumers like your BI, regular users, your report consumers, and they want to stay within that lane, those tools, and they want to be able to consume their metadata. Anything you provide from governance has to be sort of available within that, right? It has to be where you have to meet them where they're at, right? Rather than expecting them to go somewhere else. Right? The other big barrier, and this kind of goes hand in glove with the item I just discussed around data governance tool, is that by virtue of the fact that you have cataloged everything into your enterprise, that you have gone in and pulled all of this metadata that you mined through the tool, there's just a lot of information in there. There are mountains of data, and so these tools become not just another destination I need to go to find things, but as a casual user, as somebody who just maybe is going to go in, would like to go in once a week and answer a question, I've got to do search and find all kinds of content. I don't know which content I should look at. I've got thousands or tens of thousands of tables with attributes in there. When I see the metadata, there's metadata goes so deep. I'm just looking for one piece of information that's relevant, and it's very difficult to get make the needle for the haystack type of distinction. And then that becomes a major barrier, and that's one of the reasons why they don't want to go back to these tools. Right, and this, fundamentally, right, from a structural perspective, if you look at sort of a layer beyond this, not just if you think of these as symptoms to the underlying problem, the problem is that data governance itself is really only half of the picture, right? So if you only solve for half of the problem, you're not going to have a complete solution. What do I mean by that? Well, if you think of governance holistically around the information in your enterprise, it's really broken out into data governance and BI governance, right? It's because no one is really going into the database, well, maybe the database itself to access information. Sure, maybe you have one or two analysts that are writing SQL or whatever, but most people are using either BI tools or Excel or PDFs that are provided. They're consuming content through BI capabilities that you've enabled in the enterprise, right? Data science assets, what have you, whatever your portfolio looks like. And so if your governance solution needs to consider both of these, and your data governance solution in particular needs to be mindful of the fact that it has to fit neatly with whatever BI governance solution you have in place. This is very important. And this is often a missed piece. People think they can just start with data governance, and they can't. So let's get to the specifics, right? Now, if we understand the problem here, we understand that we can't do data governance by itself. We understand the causes of these issues, or typical causes of these issues. Let's talk about what effective BI governance is going to look like, right? What is the other part of the puzzle here? So first of all, governance has to happen when reports are being viewed at the point of consumption. So this is the key point. Right? Again, under the idea that people don't want to go out of their way to go deal with things that you've enabled through governance, they need to be able to consume it in the workflow that they currently have for working through their analytics. So you create a workflow where that data literacy just happens naturally as part of their report consumption experience. That's very important to be effective. A second thing that's very important to be effective is to be very judicious about what metadata you're surfacing to the user. So don't dump all of the metadata that you've collected from your data catalog on the user, because that's just an avalanche. They can't deal with it, right? Pull out the most important pieces and give that to them at the point of consumption, and give them a way to get into the data catalog tool to consume more, right? So by all means, there's lots of things that you've collected. They're very valuable, but give them the most valuable information initially and pull them into the data catalog tool if they need to do more, right? And that's a key a success criteria, right? Another one is that you need to make sure that lineage is tied to reporting. So what do I mean by that? Well, if all you have is lineage going from your data sources into your tables, and that is divorced from the report consumption experience, then I, as a user for a report, have no value, don't get any value from all that lineage work you did in the data catalog tool. It has to be integrated so that I can see when I'm looking at a particular report, where does this report come from, and have the key lineage details that are going to give me the data literacy so that I can make proper use of that content. And then finally, right, the glossary terms that you collected and worked hard to define properly and gotten approved, those things need to be tied and associated with the relevant reports. So, I mean, it kind of goes without saying, but it's amazing how many times this is missed. You know, the fact that well, great if you've defined gross margin, but and you've come up with a perfect definition for it, and everybody agrees on it. Well, if it's not tied to all of the reports that are using it, if every report consumer for a report that contains gross margin can't immediately see that that definition exists and what that definition is, then that definition serves no value. It's great as it's this ideal definition that really, from a pragmatic perspective, really doesn't help users with their consumption of analytics. So these are some of the key posts that you need to think about, the guideposts that you want to think of as you think about BI governance, right? So let's look at a framework, a way of pulling together those success criteria for BI governance together with data governance to make the entire governance solution a success. And I'm going to highlight is really in this framework, essentially 5 key steps, right? So the first one is to think about a comprehensive strategy. So understanding the fact that it isn't just about data governance, that BI governance is important. You want to think about strategically, what does that look like? So what does that mean? Well, first, you want to look at what your data catalog is going to consume. So you start with that. You say, well, I've got I'm pulling my information, my data catalog. Which BI tools am I connecting it to pull metadata about those? What information am I getting from data sources? What am I getting from ETLs? What quality and certification data am I adding to it? What kind of use statistics do I want to are useful here? Glossary definitions, etc. So really take inventory of what is going to go into your data governance tool and think about all that information from the lens of both what an analyst might care about and what a casual consumer of information might care about, right? So have that, complete that process, and then put that to the side for a moment. The next, think about your BI catalog. That is the delivery mechanism for this information, where people are going to consume their analytics together with the metadata that's required for them. And think about what do users want in that consumption experience. What is how are they going to search for the information? How do they do access requests, personalization? How do they collaborate? Any distribution, alerting, extended metadata requirements around that? What kind of metadata do they want to consume to make that whole thing work? Right. And these things may or may not be things that come from your data catalog, and it will overlap, hopefully, quite a bit with what's in the data catalog, but there may be lots of other items that exist in users' heads or in spreadsheets or various parts of the organization that simply are not going to be in your data catalog for a variety of reasons. And then now take these 2 pieces and a good understanding of what our users want in the consumption experience from their portal experience, from their analytics consumption. What is the high value content that you're landing in your data catalog? And then come up with a strategy for integrating that together, right? So identify those particular pieces of information that are going to come from the data catalog. together with whatever is going to be enriched and set directly into in the BI portal. And then together, then you have a strategy for how you're going to support your user experience. And now you can see that key link is there, so that everything that you've collected in your data catalog that is valuable to the end user is in fact going to be bubbled up and surfaced during their consumption experience. And thereby you can guarantee that you can generate value out of it. And then of course, if they want more, they just go into the data catalog. And this is kind of a theoretical underpinning. In a moment, we'll show you some examples of this to kind of make it real, so you can understand how it would work in practice for you, right? But think of it as like this kind of the two pieces of the puzzle fitting neatly together in a strategy as the key step of your journey. Then the next part of the framework is you want to say, well, now that I understand how what I'm going to do, you want to build incrementally from high impact use cases. This is very important, right? If you look at what I just described and you think about that at the enterprise scale across all of the metadata that you're collecting, it is a Herculean task. And it is not something that can be attempted or completed in a short period of time and generate value. And it's very important with governance initiative to have initial value, initial success, and then have kind of this iterative process where you can continue to add value incrementally. So pick those use cases where you can really generate the most impact. Those places where data literacy is very important. There could be executive reporting where that high impact there, or it could be reporting that's going out to a large number of users in your organization where, again, if you data literacy and the fact that lack of governance can have massive impact on effectiveness of use. Or it could be addressing a particular area of the organization that has a particularly low data literacy rate. Whatever it is, build your use case in such a way that it's going to have high impact, and importantly, that you can measure that impact, right? So these things are key framework for success is know where you're starting and have a goal for where you're going to be, and then measure the success so that in fact you can then use that to show value and to know what works, what doesn't work, and then iterate on it, right? So this is key. Step 3 is you want to look at making sure that you think about both data and reporting certification. Right? So again, it is no use at all to certify data sets in your data catalog and ignore whether a report uses certified data sets or not when the report is consumed, right? Because, well, sure, you've made it possible for the analyst to figure out which report they should use to build a new report from, to build a new dashboard. But from the report consumer perspective, they are left befuddled where they have 3 or 4 or 5 reports out there. Some were created months ago, maybe some were created by analysts that are no longer in the organization, and they simply do not know which of those are certified, which can they trust, and which they're kind of old, or they have a slightly obsolete version of the definition for this, so therefore they're not going to be consistent with anything else. So certification has to go all the way from the data level all the way into the reporting level for it to be effective. And then you want to build glossary in a way that's helpful and at the report level. Just as I mentioned before, make sure that those glossary terms, you have a mechanism, a process to bring them all the way to the point of consumption of the reporting. So I, as a user, if I don't know what something means in a particular report, I have immediate access to the key terms and how they're defined. And again, we'll show you an example of that in a bit, but that's very important. And then integrate, finally, right? You want to make sure that governance is integrated into the content onboarding process, right? So this is very important and often missed. People think of governance, let's go in there, put it in place for this particular area, you make sure it's all clean and great. And that's all well and good. But unless you have a process by which you are ensuring that after you've cleaned up that area, that it continues to be clean, that as new content is onboarded, that it continues to make sure that only the good stuff gets in there, that it's got the right glossary terms, that it's certified, that it meets all the criteria we just discussed, then you're just creating a Band-Aid, a temporary solution that is not gonna really solve the fundamental problem on an ongoing, persistent basis. So with that kind of theory, if you like, or framework and approach, I'm going to turn this over to Mike, who's going to give you an idea and some examples of how this works in practice with our product, so you can kind of visualize what the pieces of the solution would look like to make this all work.
Thanks, Maris. Do you want to stop sharing?
Yes.
Yeah, let me just share my screen here. So yeah, let's let's, as Marius said, try and bring some of this stuff to sort of reality. And I'm going to I'm going to look at sort of the data catalog view of the world, and then talk about sort of the BI portal view of the world, and then try and bring them together, as Marius said, and show you how they can sort of work in union, what the overlap is. And really what we're talking about here is sort of creating value and benefit for the wider audience of sort of business users and data consumers out there, and not just sort of, I'm sure there's analysts and technical folks getting value out of their data catalogs today, but to really sort of prove a wider value, we have to expose it to those business users. So let's jump in here, and I'm going to sort of pick on Alation here as an example of a data cataloging and governance tool. And sort of, as you go into tools like this, again, what are they doing? Well, on the left-hand side, they're crawling any sort of databases that you connect them to. So we just have one here, right? They are crawling any sort of queries or data sets, looking through any BI tools that you might have hooked up to them. And, as a user, I can go into, say, my database and start looking at different tables that exist, understanding what are contained in those tables. So if I pick on something here, oops. If I pick on a table, I can see what it contains. I can see example data. You can tag this content. You can tag columns. You can add custom metadata to it. And I can get a feeling for what's happening at the data level. It can identify PII data, etc. It can allow me to say, is this a certified data set that people should be using? So, they're going through and crawling the underlying data. But a lot of times as well, we're connecting these to our BI tools as well. And within, our demo instance here, we're connecting to a Tableau instance where it's going through and cataloging all the content within our Tableau sites that we have out there. And as Marius said, one of the challenges is if I'm using this to sort of find content, show me everything related to sales analysis, it's really crawling through all the sort of workbooks and worksheets we have on this Tableau instance. So it's not uncommon to come back with a view like this, where there's multiple versions of the same stuff out there. There's people who are, creating stuff that's still in development, maybe. And to know which one is sort of the blessed and certified view that I should be looking at is somewhat challenging and difficult for end users, which is why they typically don't come in here. But if you do click on something, it does give us the ability to look at metadata that we want to associate with these particular reports. So if we're doing certification in here, what's the status of that? Categorizing it, maybe, is it for internal use? Is it publicly facing? Does it contain PII data? All the things that Marius spoke about. It shows me lineage information. So, what is this workbook based on? It's coming from that daily sales summary table that we were just looking at. So, I get what I would call sort of a backwards looking view in terms of where, what data is feeding this. And we'll look at, how we can extend this within the portal in a minute. But generally, it gives me an environment where it's crawling everything out there, allows me to set, fields and conditions and categorization and certification and understand the lineage. But again, it's somewhat of a complex environment for sort of the typical business user. So on the other side of the equation that Marius was discussing is the concept of a BI portal, which is obviously what we create over here at Metric Insights. But there's a lot of companies creating their own sort of portals and catalogs for BI in their organization. Oftentimes because typically they have multiple sources of BI, everything from spreadsheets to multiple BI tools to reporting in different applications. I think the difference here very much is obviously it's focused on the end user a little bit more, and it's also focused on the sort of report consumption piece. So it's focused more on sort of the reporting and dashboard layer. So what you're looking at here, for those that haven't seen Metric Insights in the past, is sort of our catalog view, where each of these tiles is linked to a particular asset that we've chosen to publish and curate for our end users. So I've got stuff coming from Tableau and Power BI and Click. I've got spreadsheets in here and metrics. But it's more of a curated experience around the user who is coming in. So it's tied to my permissions and my security, and making sure that, you know, this is a set of content that I'm going to be interested in. And so, you know, clearly if I click on this content, it also gives me, you know, one place, and we'll come back to this in a minute, but one place to access that content in real time. So it's going to render, in this case, a live version of that dashboard so I can interact with it, you know, rather than just looking at the metadata that's associated with it. So now I have my live Tableau dashboard down here. Whereas the data catalog goes and sort of crawls everything, which is what you want it to do, right? Go crawl all my database tables, all my reports and dashboards that are out there, so that we've got sort of a single place to see all of that. When we create a BI portal, we want to create a sort of very curated experience for users. Again, we only want to put sort of the blessed and certified content in there. So it's important to have this concept of sort of a publishing process for our content. And by that I mean, you know, the catalog needs to go and connect to all our different sources, and as new content is getting created, we want to make sort of a conscious decision that that's something that we want to push out to our end users. And we do that through the concept of what we call publishing workflows. And think of them as sort of a production line, if you like, a series of steps where we're going to have the necessary checks and balances that involve whichever stakeholders that it needs to make sure that the content is correct and accurate, but that we're also adding in any additional sort of metadata that makes sense for users to help them with their literacy. So it's things like we were seeing in the data catalog, and we'll come back to sort of how these work together in a minute. But, you know, tagging content in appropriate ways, classifying content in appropriate ways, documenting content, showing who owns that content, so that users get a good feeling for, you know, what the content is and how it should be used, and that they can find it easily. And so as part of these publishing processes, it goes through this sort of production line of checks and balances. We add the necessary metadata before we ultimately certify that at an appropriate level and put it into the catalog that we were just looking at. So again, we're making sort of conscious decisions around what it is we're going to push out to the end users. So the net result for an end user is that when they are looking at content within that catalog, like that sales analysis dashboard that we were just looking at, when they click on one of those tiles, they have access to that metadata, but only the metadata that we deem is going to be useful to them in terms of understanding the content. So it might be things like, you know, ownership. You know, if I have questions around this content, who should I reach out to? Obviously, descriptions, things like when was the content last updated? So when was it last refreshed with data? Engagement statistics, how popular is it? But then we start to see stuff coming from our data catalog as well. And this is where the two sort of link together. So, you know, if we are classifying content within, say, Alation, if I go back to our catalog sales analysis dashboard over here, you know, we were cataloging the classification of the content. Is it for internal use? Does it contain confidential information? Is it publicly facing information? Well, if we're maintaining that here, then we want to make sure that that is flooding through to our data catalog, because that's useful information to the end user. You know, if we're cataloging within Alation, you know, does this contain PII data? That's useful information that we want to push through to the end user. does it contain any restricted information that we should be aware of? So anything that you're setting within the data catalog that is relevant to the end user as part of the publishing process, we want to make sure we're pulling that in and attaching it to any reports that it's relevant to. And only the metadata that makes sense. And then as part of that publishing workflow, if there's anything that we're not capturing within Alation, maybe we have some help documentation that we want to attach. Well, let's add that as part of the publishing process so that we have a complete set of metadata here for our users. We mentioned lineage, and that's something that the data catalog is collecting as well. Well, lineage is something as well that is probably interesting to the end users. So we want to make sure that that is flowing through as well. So any lineage that is sort of backward looking that we can garner from the catalog or from the BI tool itself, we want to show that. So in this case, this sales analysis workbook is being fed by data coming from this particular database table that we saw in cataloged in Alation that's actually sitting in a MySQL database. So, we know that this is a certified database table. It's feeding our workbook. And so I'm confident in sort of where that data is coming from. But we can extend that as well to be more forward-looking as well within the BI portal. So we know this has been published as a certified tile that we saw within the catalog. And actually, we can also tell that it's going out in a series of distribution, email distributions, in this case, that certain users might be subscribed to. So as a user, if I'm receiving sort of this daily favorites digest of different reports and dashboards, I can have the lineage that says, okay, I see there's this sales analysis dashboard in this email that I get every day. I can be confident that that's certified. I know it's coming from Tableau and where that data is actually being sourced from. So I've got the context around it. So, the catalog is good at giving me sort of that backward-facing lineage, but I can also extend that within the BI catalog to understand all the sort of areas that content is being consumed as well. Marius touched on sort of glossary terms as well. So whether they are being defined in the data catalog or whether we want to maintain a glossary directly within the BI catalog, the key point here is that we can attach that to any reports or dashboards that contain certain terms or definitions. So when I'm looking at a particular dashboard, I should be able to bring up any definitions associated with that. So metrics, how they defined, who owns those definitions, but then also use that to understand, for a particular blessed definition and calculation, where else is that being used as I look across the catalog of reports that we have available? And I'm going to look at search in a minute, but I could drill into this then and see, where else is sales as this definition being used, where is cost, gross margin, whatever it might be. So tying it to the reports, but then looking across the catalog to see where those definitions are. Search is another key piece of the equation. So because we're capturing all this metadata and now we're tying it to the actual assets, the reports, the dashboards within our BI catalog so that the users can get benefit out of that, we can also use it to help them search for content. So, back to my search that we did within Alation earlier, if I search within my catalog for things related to sales analysis, it's only going to search through that certified content that we have in the catalog that has been blessed. It's going to take into account, what I have access to or what I'm allowed to discover within the catalog. And obviously, it's looking across all that metadata. So whether it's metadata we're capturing in here or whether it's metadata that's coming across from our underlying data catalog tool, I can search for content. I can filter by any of those definitions, those categorizations that we saw and that we've tagged with it. So it makes it easier to sort of find and discover content that I might be interested in. So, having search capabilities within your catalog is important, and that search capability is really enabled by the work that is happening at the governance tool and the governance level to really make search comprehensive and easy for users to filter out by all that metadata. For interest's sake here, at Metric Insights, we're extending this, and for those that may have seen some webinars that we've done recently, we're extending this into the idea of sort of a more sort of directed search experience as well. So what you just saw was a very sort of Google-style search experience where I can search for content, it brings back results, I can filter that out. We're introducing this concept of, as well as this idea of a concierge, which allows us to really make better suggestions around what content people should be looking at. And again, this is very much driven by the governance processes that we have in place, that capturing of metadata. So rather than sort of show me just all the sales reports out there, I can have more of a discussion with the concierge. So can you suggest some reports around sort of customer churn and reports that will help me answer questions around customer churn? And the concierge will go out and make recommendations based on what it knows about the underlying content and the metadata that's out there, including all the stuff that we've looked at already. It will make some suggestions over there on the right-hand side here of different reports and dashboards that might be interesting. And I can continue the conversation into the metadata or utilizing the metadata. So maybe, which of these are most popular. Again, that's looking into that metadata that we're capturing around the underlying reports and dashboards within the let's look here, I ran it earlier, within the catalog, so it can bring me back sort of engagement numbers, how are things performing, and I can continue to drill into the metadata. So drilling into the elation metadata, are any of these confidential? Well, yes, one of these has confidential information in there, and I should be aware of that. So all this metadata is kind of the foundational elements that we need to better deliver content and information to the end business consumers. The last thing I want to touch on here is the other thing we haven't spoken a lot about, but is happening sort of within the governance teams that we have out there, is sort of usage and governance policies around sort of usage of certain data within the organization. So we're doing things like tagging confidential information, we're doing things like identifying PII data. But if we're making that effort, we want to make sure that end users are understanding when reports contain information like that and are acknowledging any sort of usage policies that we have around confidential information. So if we have a financial report or a report with customer information out there, and we've gone through the process of defining usage policies around that data, well, we want to expose that at the report level and make sure that users understand that there are usage policies around this and show them what they are, so this can link out to what our usage policies are. But also understand that users are seeing that and that they are going through and accepting those usage policies. So they are accepting how they should be using this information, so that we can kind of come full circle here and make sure that, if we're pushing this report out to people, understanding those that have read the usage policies and accepted them, made a conscious effort to do that, we can keep track that that's happening. We can sort of reach out to users who have not accepted them, make sure we're closing the loop, and that effort that we're putting in at the governance level is getting used. So again, I guess in summary, what we're talking about here is, taking the effort that is going into the governance tools like Elation, Calibra, Purview around categorization, tagging, metadata, governance policies, bringing that to the forefront for our business users who are accessing that content at the report level, that data through reports and dashboards and spreadsheets, through a centralized portal like Metric Insights, make sure that they're making use of that effort, and that we're getting general adoption of what's happening in the governance teams. So with that, maybe let's open it up to any Q&A, and feel free to enter any questions into the chat window and Q&A window. I can see a couple coming in here, Marius. Maybe let's get to some questions. Okay, where does Metric Insights store the governance guidance that we just showed? So policies and processes around what's included, how validation is done, how metadata and categorization is defined. So yeah, do you maybe want to talk about sort of where metadata is coming from, and and about sort of the sort of amalgamation of that content, Marius?
Yeah, so we have from a metric insights perspective, we have a metadata store. It's actually a MySQL database that is included in the application, and the metadata definitions that are coming in from, let's say, a data governance tool, are collected in there, and then there often is usually an automated synchronization process. So, for example, glossary definitions, if you change it, in the example that Mike had in Elation or Purview or what have you, you are able to automatically connect that data to automatically have that data change reflected in the portal, because we've built sort of custom plugins for all of the leading data catalog vendors, as well as we have the ability to just ingest information from like a data set. You can give us an extract, and then we synchronize to that. And remember that in general, we find that only a proportion of the metadata is coming from the data catalogs. Sometimes there's just things that is more end user generated metadata that might not exist in the data catalog, and that gets added, as Mike was showing you, through this publishing process, or it gets ingested again as it comes from SharePoint lists or other Excels or things of that nature that are, get brought in as a data set, and then we automatically synchronize to those. But the idea is that you don't have to re-enter anything manually. It all comes in from whatever your system of record is. In the event that there's no system of record, and then the user can add it manually when they're onboarding the content.
Yeah, and then as it relates to sort of the documentation as well that I showed briefly, so if you are attaching sort of usage guidelines or release notes or anything like that, which typically aren't in your data catalog tool because they're related to the reporting, then that's all stored in our data store as well. Or you could link out if you have a wiki or something where you're storing that. It could link out to that as well, so you've got options.
Yeah. There's another question here about
yeah.
how we go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Yeah, so how does Metric Insights handle permissions for who can sort of edit records and metadata for the BI reports? So again, either there's certain metadata flowing in, as Marius just said, from the underlying tools, and it's getting set automatically because it's already out there, or it's being set as part of these publishing processes. I'm sharing the screen again here, where it's going through a number of steps. At each step, there may be certain fields or certain fields that need to get set as part of that step. And a step is assigned to a certain person or people who are responsible for it. So that the publishing workflow has permissions around it. So, okay, once a particular report comes to a point where it's supposed to be reviewed by the developers, well, the developer will be assigned that to their queue, and when they come into it, there will be certain things that they're responsible for adding, maybe updating the description or the name or whatever it might be. They will then save it and move it on to the next step. And when it's up for business review, the business user might be responsible for tagging it and adding in additional documentation. It then goes to a data steward who may be responsible for adding in additional metadata fields or confirming whether it has PII data or something. And then ultimately, someone will be responsible for moving it into the certified step that we spoke about before.
Yes.
So giving it the check. Yeah,
And
sorry, Maris, go on.
all of that, just to add to what Mike said, all that, of course, is, as Mike said, configured at the stage level, which stage it's in, and then there's groups of users that are assigned to a stage with permissions to either view certain metadata fields and or edit those fields as part of that stage. And then, of course, the content itself is governed based on the security model that you have in place. So can only process things that are put in a staging category that you have access to, and that is done either through synchronization through Active Directory and things of that nature, or we can sync the security model to your source BI system like Tableau, Power BI, etc., and automatically inherit the security from those systems without the use of Active Directory. So both of those are possible.
I think something else that we kind of didn't talk about that I think is important. Marius kind of touched on the problem in the slide deck is governance as well, and all this sort of setting of metadata and all that sort of stuff is also something that it's not sort of a one-time thing in a lot of cases. So yes, you set definitions and you define glossary terms and calculations, you set metadata, but things change over time. Whether it's be the way you calculate things, or you change where data is coming from because you've brought in a new source system or something. So as part of these publishing workflows as well, it's typical to sort of have this review or attestation stage where, either when something changes or after a period of time, you want to make sure you're sort of flagging things for review. So, this financial report has been out there for a number of quarters now, and maybe we just want to, flag that as something that we might want to assign to someone to check that, the definitions and the metadata and the lineage and all that is still accurate, and that it, is worthy of its certification still. Or maybe it's something that's become obsolete now that we want to remove and declutter with and make sure that we're replacing it with the new certified version of that report. Let's just check here. So looks like they were the only two questions. Okay, another one just popped in. What are the global geographic data center regions to store the metadata database of metric insights? Okay, so a question here, I guess, really around deployment, and important to understand that metric insights can be sort of deployed anywhere. So the portal that you're just looking at, you can take that on premise and have the data store, the metadata store behind your firewall, running completely sort of on premise or in virtual environment in your organization. It can also be deployed into private clouds. So any of the sort of major cloud vendors, we can deploy it out there. We have packages for that, and it can also be hosted by us in the public cloud. I think we're flexible on sort of regional storage, Marius, right? Is that correct?
That's right. And
Yeah.
oftentimes there are, GDPR requirements or things of that nature that require, or if you're deploying in China or something like that, obviously you can't have the data center running here. It's got to be it's got to be deployed into that. So we can work with either any of your, as Mike said, existing cloud providers have multiple zones. It can be deployed in the right zone there, or if you have your own infrastructure, then it could just be deployed within your own infrastructure. It's all Dockerized, so it can deploy pretty much anywhere. And that way you can be sure that you're meeting the GDPR requirements or other kinds of compliance requirements that you have for data.
So we are coming up to the top of the hour here. Last call for questions. There is a question here about whether we can receive the PowerPoint. So there will be a recording sent out. I think we could upload the PowerPoint as well to a link so that's available to anyone that wants it. So we'll make sure we send out a link to that as well so that you can download it.
Oh,
But
and there's one last question. I think
yeah.
it's actually from a metric, it looks like from Garrett, about acknowledgement that we showed. That does not require a portal page. That's just that is an announcement. There's a way that you can set up announcements to be to be required to be show and then a required dismissal. And so and there's also a programmable interface for announcements. So you can script any kind of automated generation of announcements for content for that acknowledgement, and then we track who acknowledged it so that you can use that monitor from a compliance perspective.
Good. Well, thank you, Marius, for helping out on the webinar today, and thanks everyone for joining. Look out for the recording and the PowerPoint, and we'll hope to see you on future webinars.
Thank you, everyone.